The pen was already uncapped when they slid the folder toward me, and that's when I understood what they were really asking me to give up. It wasn't framed as a loss. Nothing ever is. They called it a safeguard. A routine update. A way to make sure things ran smoothly at your age. The room was quiet, professional, carefully kind. No raised voices. No threats. Just a table, a chair, and a stack of documents that carried the weight of my entire working life. I was 74 years old, and I had built this practice from a rented office with a cracked window and a borrowed desk. 46 years of work. Late nights. Missed birthdays. A reputation that took decades to earn and only seconds to erase. And here they were, telling me this was for my own good. They spoke slowly, like I might miss something important. Words like continuity, liability, transition. Someone said, "You won't even notice the difference." Another added, gently, "This is standard when someone reaches your stage." My stage. As if I'd already stepped off the map. I flipped through the pages, my name printed everywhere it mattered, and nowhere it counted. Authority reassigned. Decision-making transferred. My role reduced to something honorary, decorative. Still present, technically. Just no longer necessary. No one looked me in the eye when they said it would be easier if I signed today. I thought about how often I'd warned my own clients about this exact moment. About papers that smile at you while they erase you. About how pressure doesn't always come with force. Sometimes it comes with patience. My hand hovered over the signature line. I could feel it then, clear as anything I've ever known. If I signed, I wouldn't just be stepping back. I would be disappearing. That's when my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. No name. No number I recognized. Just an incoming call, vibrating against my ribs like a quiet alarm I almost ignored. I excused myself, standing slowly, aware of every eye following me as I stepped into the hallway and answered. The voice on the other end didn't try to save me. It didn't offer comfort or outrage. It simply told me something I hadn't been meant to know, and once I heard it, there was no unhearing it. The papers in that room were not temporary, and the consequences were not reversible. And the people waiting for me inside already knew that. The man on the phone spoke like someone reading from a file he'd already memorized. He said my name, my license number, and the exact date I'd founded the practice, which told me right away this wasn't a wrong number. He didn't introduce himself at first. Just asked if I was somewhere private, and when I said I was standing in a hallway with beige walls and framed mission statements, he told me that would do. What he shared wasn't dramatic. No accusations. No warnings delivered with urgency. Just facts, stacked one on top of the other until they formed something heavy enough to knock the air out of me. He told me the documents I was being asked to sign weren't an update. They were a transfer. Permanent. Once filed, my legal authority wouldn't just be paused. It would be extinguished. No appeals. No automatic reinstatement. And the timeline for execution was already set. I asked how he knew this. He said the filings had been drafted weeks ago, not this morning. That meetings had happened without me. That language had been adjusted carefully to avoid triggering review boards or external oversight. He said my age had been cited more than once, always politely, always as concern. "You're being positioned as a risk," he said. "Not a failure. Just, obsolete." I leaned against the wall and felt something inside me steady instead of break. A strange calm settled in, the kind that only comes when confusion finally lifts. I asked him why he was calling me. There was a pause then. Not long, but honest. He said he'd been asked to prepare contingency paperwork in case I refused to cooperate. He said my signature would make things easier for everyone involved, but my refusal wouldn't stop the process. It would only change how clean it looked. "What happens if I sign?" I asked. Another pause. This one heavier. You'll still have a title, he said. You'll still be invited to events. But you won't be consulted. You won't be protected. And if anything goes wrong later, the responsibility will quietly remain yours. I closed my eyes and thought about all the times I'd been told to trust the process. About how often that phrase had been used to hurry people past the part where they should stop and think. Before he hung up, he told me one last thing. That once the documents were filed, there would be no clean way back in. Not legally. Not reputationally. The story would already be written, and I would be cast as someone who stepped aside willingly. When I thanked him, my voice surprised me by not shaking. I put the phone back in my pocket and stood there a moment longer, listening to the quiet hum of the building, knowing that inside that room, they were still waiting for me to sign myself away. When I went back into the room, they all smiled at once, like they'd practiced it. Someone asked if everything was all right. Another said we could take our time. The folder was still open in front of my chair, the pen resting exactly where my hand would fall if I sat down. They had arranged the moment carefully. Comfort without warmth. Patience without mercy. I didn't sit right away. I asked a question instead. Just one. How long ago did you decide this? There was a flicker then. Quick, almost invisible. One man glanced at another. A woman cleared her throat and said, "This isn't about deciding anything. It's about planning responsibly." I nodded, like I accepted that. Then I asked who had contacted the state board on my behalf. Silence followed. Not confusion. Calculation. They started explaining again. Slowly. Reassuringly. Telling me how respected I was, how my legacy was secure, how this would protect everything I'd built. They said my health had been mentioned only in passing. That my recent absence from conferences had raised questions. That it was better to be proactive. I realized then that they weren't trying to convince me I was incapable. They were trying to convince me I was tired. That this was a relief I just hadn't recognized yet. I told them I needed more time. The temperature in the room shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. One of them leaned forward and said, "We really should finalize this today." Another added, "Delays can complicate things." I thought about the call. About the filings already drafted. About how my cooperation would make this quiet, and my resistance would make it inconvenient. They weren't afraid of me saying no. They were afraid of me saying no out loud. I picked up the folder and felt the weight of it in my hands. Every page was precise. Polite. Ruthless. It struck me how easy it would be to sign. One motion. One name. Years reduced to a footnote. I told them I'd have my attorney review it. That's when the kindness thinned. Someone reminded me that legal reviews could be expensive. Someone else suggested I might be overcomplicating things. A third mentioned, softly, that refusing could raise concerns about judgment. There it was. The weapon, finally visible. Age, wrapped in worry. Concern, sharpened into leverage. I set the folder down without signing anything. I said I would not be making a decision today. No one argued. They didn't need to. The pressure wasn't going anywhere. It would follow me out of that room, into calls, emails, gentle reminders. They were counting on time wearing me down. As I walked toward the exit, I understood something with a clarity that surprised me. This wasn't about protecting the work. It was about removing the man who still stood in the way of owning it. The drive home felt longer than it should have, even though I took the same streets I'd driven for years. Every stoplight gave me too much time to think. Not about anger. Not even betrayal, exactly. What stayed with me was how calmly it had all been arranged. They hadn't rushed because they didn't need to. They believed time was on their side. That age would do the persuading for them. By the time I got home, there were already 2 emails waiting. Polite subject lines. Follow-ups. Summaries of what we discussed. No mention of my questions. No mention of my refusal. Just a gentle assumption that I'd come around. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table where I'd paid bills and signed leases and written checks for payroll when things were lean. I spread the copies of the documents out again, slower this time, reading what I'd missed before. The language was clever. Authority transferred for operational efficiency. Oversight committees empowered in my stead. My continued association framed as advisory, non-binding. It was all legal. All clean. All final. What struck me hardest wasn't the loss of control. It was the erasure of consent. Decisions made without me, justified by my presence as a problem to be managed. The phone rang just after dinner. This time, I recognized the number. Someone from the group. Checking in. Asking how I was feeling. Reminding me how stressful big decisions can be. Suggesting, kindly, that dragging things out might reflect poorly if outside parties got involved. I listened. I thanked them. I said I was considering my options. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet and admitted something I hadn't wanted to before. They weren't wrong about one thing. I was tired. Not confused. Not incapable. Just tired of having to prove, again and again, that my years were still worth something. That experience didn't expire the moment it became inconvenient. I went to bed knowing the pressure would increase. More calls. More concern. Maybe even whispers about my stability if I didn't comply. But I also knew this now, signing wasn't a step toward rest. It was a step toward being written out of my own life's work while I was still breathing. The next morning, the tone changed. No one said anything outright, but I could hear it in the pauses. In the way messages were worded. A little firmer. A little less optional. One email mentioned timelines. Another mentioned external visibility. A third suggested it might be wise to avoid unnecessary scrutiny, given how such situations can sometimes be misinterpreted. Misinterpreted by whom was never said. By noon, I received a call from someone I'd trained myself 20 years earlier. A man who used to ask me for guidance before every major decision. Now he spoke carefully, choosing each word like it had been weighed by someone else first. He said there were concerns about continuity. About how clients and partners might react if I appeared resistant to change. He stressed that no one was questioning my competence. Just my adaptability. That was when I realized the story had already begun circulating. Not that I was wrong. Not that I was failing. Just that I was slowing things down. I asked him a simple question. If I sign, am I protected? He hesitated. Not long enough to be obvious. Just long enough to matter. He said protections were complex. Situational. Dependent on cooperation. That was the word they kept circling back to. Cooperation. As if this were a favor I owed, not a life I'd built. After the call, I walked into my study and looked at the framed photos on the wall. Early days. The first office. The first hire. People I'd stood beside when they were young and scared and trying to prove themselves. I wondered how many of them knew what was being planned now. How many believed it was necessary. The hardest part wasn't the pressure. It was the quiet grief of understanding that loyalty, once assumed, had been replaced by convenience. Late that afternoon, my phone rang again. A different number this time. Unknown. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. When I answered, the voice on the other end asked if I remembered a clause buried deep in my original partnership agreement. One I hadn't thought about in decades. I said I did. He told me they were hoping I didn't. I asked him how he knew about that clause. He said he'd been doing contract reviews for a long time, long enough to recognize patterns. He said when people move this carefully, it's usually because there's something older they don't want revisited. Something written when trust was still assumed instead of managed. That clause, he reminded me, had been my safeguard. A provision stating that any transfer of authority required my informed consent, given freely, without coercion, and with independent review. It was buried deep, written in plain language, almost old-fashioned. The kind of thing people skim past when they think time has softened its edges. He told me someone had flagged it internally, not as a problem, but as an obstacle. They were betting I wouldn't remember it, or wouldn't have the energy to insist it mattered. I thanked him and asked the question that had been sitting in my chest all day. What happens if I refuse to sign? He didn't dress it up. He said they would escalate. More concern. More documentation. Possibly even a formal evaluation, framed as care. He said none of it would be loud, but all of it would be permanent in its own way. But, he added, if you invoke that clause publicly, the process stops. Not forever. But long enough for sunlight to reach places they didn't intend. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall where a clock ticked louder than it ever had before. I understood then what the real cost was. Not the work. Not the reputation. The cost was being forced into a choice between compliance and visibility. Between disappearing quietly or standing still while people questioned whether I still belonged. That evening, another message came in. This one less patient. Asking when I'd be ready to move forward. Reminding me how uncomfortable drawn-out transitions could become for everyone involved. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled the old agreement from a drawer I hadn't opened in years. The paper was yellowed, the edges soft. My signature looked younger, steadier. But the words were still there, exactly as I'd written them. For the first time since this began, I didn't feel cornered. I felt informed. And that made all the difference. Clarity doesn't arrive like a revelation. It settles in quietly, the way dust does when the room finally stops shaking. I didn't announce anything the next day. I didn't threaten or accuse. I simply sent one short message stating that any further discussion would include my attorney and that I would be invoking the consent clause outlined in the original agreement. Nothing more. No emotion. Just fact. The response was immediate. Calls I didn't answer. Emails that arrived in clusters instead of singles. Concern sharpened into urgency. One message warned, delicately, that involving outside counsel could complicate relationships. Another reminded me how fragile public perception can be at my stage of life. There it was again. My stage. As if I were already exiting, whether I agreed or not. By afternoon, someone I trusted showed up at my door unannounced. Not to argue. To persuade. He sat across from me at the same kitchen table and spoke softly about how things had changed. About how institutions outgrow individuals. About how maybe it was time to let go with grace. I listened. Then I asked him if grace required surrender. He didn't answer. What I felt then wasn't anger. It was something colder and steadier. The understanding that the moment I stopped being useful, my presence became inconvenient. That all the talk of respect had always depended on my silence. When he left, I stood at the window and watched his car disappear down the street. I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of losing access. Not of being sidelined. Not even of being doubted. What frightened me before was the idea of vanishing without a word, of signing myself into absence while everyone smiled and called it care. That fear was gone. The unknown call hadn't saved me by stopping what was happening. It saved me by naming it. By stripping away the softness and showing me the machinery underneath. I didn't know how this would end. I knew there would be consequences. Awkwardness. Distance. Maybe even quiet punishment. But I also knew this. Whatever came next, it would happen with my eyes open. The formal letter arrived 3 days later. Not by email. By courier. Thick paper. Neutral language. It acknowledged my invocation of the clause and confirmed that all further actions were paused pending review. On the surface, it sounded reasonable. Cooperative, even. What it didn't say mattered more. It didn't apologize. It didn't correct the record. It didn't admit anything improper had occurred. It simply froze the moment in place, like a chess game interrupted mid-move, waiting for me to blink. I understood then that this was as close to retreat as they were willing to show. People stopped calling as often. Meetings I'd once been invited to were suddenly postponed. A few colleagues avoided eye contact when I ran into them in public, as if my resistance were contagious. No one confronted me. No one supported me openly either. That silence told me everything. I was still legally present. Still protected, for now. But I was no longer central to the future they were planning. And I could live with that, because I was no longer being erased quietly. One afternoon, I sat alone in my office after everyone else had gone home. The building hummed the way it always had. Familiar. Almost comforting. I ran my hand along the edge of my desk and thought about how close I'd come to signing it all away in a single, tired moment. If that phone hadn't rung, I would have. Not because I agreed. But because I was worn down enough to believe resistance would cost more than surrender. That's how these things work. No villain. No shouting. Just patience aimed in one direction. I didn't win anything. Not really. The work would go on. My role would continue to shrink. I could see that clearly now. But I hadn't disappeared. I still had my name. My voice. My consent intact. At this age, that mattered more than titles or access ever could. I still think about how close it came to ending differently. Not with a fight. Not with a dramatic collapse. Just a signature placed in the right box, followed by polite handshakes and reassurances that I'd done the sensible thing. I would have gone home that day lighter in one sense, emptied in another, telling myself this was how endings were supposed to look. Instead, I wake up now knowing I chose awareness over ease. The work is still there, though I hold it differently. I'm consulted less. Informed selectively. Some doors don't open the way they used to. That's the price of refusing to disappear quietly, and I pay it without resentment. What I didn't lose was myself. No one can say I stepped aside willingly. No one can rewrite my presence as consent. When decisions are made now, they are made knowing I saw the attempt for what it was and declined to vanish to make things simpler for others. The unknown caller never reached out again. I don't know his name. I don't know why he chose to tell me the truth when it would have been easier not to. I only know that without that interruption, I would have mistaken pressure for care and silence for dignity. There's a particular danger in growing older in rooms where power lives. People stop asking what you want and start explaining what's best. They confuse your patience for permission. They mistake your history for something already finished. Mine isn't. I didn't save the institution. I didn't expose anyone publicly. I didn't reclaim control the way younger men imagine control looks. What I did was smaller and harder. I remained present. At this age, when so much is decided around you instead of with you, that choice matters. It's the difference between being managed and being known. And I intend, for as long as I am able, to be known.